Good evening and welcome. Throughout the day, we've been looking at the union budget. Is it a budget for everyone? What are the big highlights? Well, there's a big capex spend. There's a huge investment in our green transition. There's a big change, if you want it to be a change, as far as tax is concerned, personal income tax. What does it all mean? We'll be looking at all of those details over the next 1 hour. Nidhi?
And of course, we'll be looking at the political fallout as well. Remember, this is the last big budget of the government ahead of next year's general elections. And let me introduce our first two guests tonight. We have Mr. Amitabh Kant, India's Sherpa for the G20. Also, Dr. Amit Mitra, advisor to the West Bengal Chief Minister. And wonderful to have both of you on the program with us. Amitabh Kant, wanted to begin by asking you, I think many were wondering whether this would end up being a populist budget because it is the last big budget ahead of the general elections, and it's actually turned out to be quite the opposite of that, very much focused on looking at growth and obviously then therefore generating employment, etc. Tell us more about that in terms of its vision. Is the government therefore looking at a more long-term approach on getting India's growth back on track?
So Nidhi, this budget is all about good governance being good politics. This budget really demonstrates that the government wants to take India on a long-term trajectory of growth, largely because of several features in the budget. One is that it leaves a lot of cash in the hands of individuals through direct taxes. And that means that you're trying to drive consumption. And when you drive consumption in the economy, you're trying to push demand. And demand in turn will lead to greater amount of capacity utilization. And capacity utilization would lead to fresh investments in your economy. And therefore, you'll stimulate the virtuous cycle of private sector investment in the economy. A second is a very huge capex, third year in a row, and this year by a whopping 33%. So you are trying to build a new India in terms of infrastructure. New airports, 50 new airports, 2.4 lakh on railways, 9 times more than the outlay which was in 2013-14, a huge amount of outlays for roads. So you are building a completely new India there. And the third key thing to my mind is a huge focus on going digital across every sector and going green, which is very, very important if India has to sustain its growth in an environmentally friendly manner. And this is very critical because border tax will set in 2026 from Europe. And if you want to export, you need to go green in a very big way. But I think the remarkable feature of this budget is really a huge focus on cutting edge technology in every single sector, whether it's electric mobility, green hydrogen, battery storage, pump storage, all these cutting, or 3 centers of excellence for artificial intelligence, or 100 labs for 5G.
It sounds great. It sounds great.
Massive amount of technological breakthrough.
I just want to ask Dr. Amit Mitra that what Amitabh Kant is saying and what the Finance Minister says actually sounds pretty terrific. In terms of its aims and what they've laid out. So what is your primary criticism of the budget, Dr. Mitra?
I think it's very important that if somebody fought an election and had a grassroots experience, they would see the world very differently in a more balanced manner than what I just heard. Let me start by saying, what is the current problem that a government is facing? Today, you have approximately 3.7 crores, that's 37 million people unemployed. And you have 1.2 crores, that's 12 million people, who have given up searching for jobs. Now, you multiply that by 5 dependents per person, you're talking about a humongous number of people who are distressed. Families are distressed. A budget will immediately try to address that. Now, I didn't even hear of the unemployment during the discourse. Let me go to the second issue. Where do they fall back when they don't have a job? They fall back on 100 days work. That has been the major development of India for the last decade. What has happened to that? The budget from 89,000 crores, 89,400 crores, cut the money for the 100 days work down to 60,000 crores. But these are the poorest people who, for livelihood and for survival, take advantage of the 100 days work. Third, what has happened to inflation? How does it affect you and me? Relatively, it affects the poor people in my constituencies that I have dealt with.
Okay.
Now, take, for example, milk, 8.51% increase. If spices, 20% increase. So that's the third. And the last point I'll make on this is, there is a 90% of employment given in this country by the unorganized sector. They produce maybe between 40 to 50% of GDP. Not a single word on that. And they don't have health, they don't have social security, they don't have education. So what is interesting is a budget would first try to handle an immediate issue, balance it by handling a long-term gestation period issue,
sure,
which comes from capital investment.
Okay, Dr. Mitra, I get the point that you're saying. Amitabh Kant, the key word over there, unemployment. Has enough been done to address that?
So, Vishnu, how do you create jobs in an economy? Do you do that by distributing poverty? You need to stimulate growth in an economy. You need to put India on a high trajectory growth over a long period of time. How do you create jobs? By putting resources into capital investments. The more, it has a huge multiplier impact. And the more, if you're putting in 10 lakh crore in infrastructure, the capex spend will be enormous. And then you're asking the states to utilize the 1.3 lakh crore again in capital investment during the next 1 year. So the impact will be enormous in terms of job creation. And in addition to all this, look at the amount of focus in terms of agriculture, in terms of animal husbandry, in terms of fisheries, in terms of creating a completely new skilling in a vast range of new areas of growth. So my view is very clear that jobs will come if India grows. Jobs will come if we are able to create a new infrastructure in India. Jobs, good quality jobs will come if you do good urbanization in India. Jobs will come if you drive tourism in India. All that is a very major focus and emphasis in today's budget.
Okay.
Dr. Amit Mitra, when you say that, the opposition is saying that this is not a pro-people budget in that sense and pro-poor in particular, but let's say you look at the tax slabs today. And the options that people have been given in terms of these tax exemptions, etc. You don't think that that is something the salaried class would welcome?
No, I think salaried class would welcome. But remember, Nidhi, that when you're going from 5 lakh to 7 lakhs, inflationary factors eat up part of this. But let me come back to this question. How do you create jobs? Everybody, those who understand macroeconomics and have studied macroeconomics, they know the idea is to put money into the hands of the people immediately. This is what the whole world is doing. Parallelly, you take a long-term gestation period, which takes time for infrastructure and other things. That's a second. Third is private sector then, according to this government, you want the private sector to come in and you crowd in, there's a new term they've discovered. What do they find in the private sector? 70% capacity utilization, which means they're not going to buy new plant, new machinery. So you have Keynesian stimulation on one side, which is giving money into the hands of the people, which USA, UK, Japan, Germany, you name it, everybody has done it. But we don't do it. We follow the Ronald Reagan model, called the supply side model. What problem with that creates is, this 5 crore people wait while we hear lectures. Or this will happen and that will happen. You have to do both. You have to walk on both feet. This budget misses that opportunity of helping those who need to come back into the market, those who are looking for jobs come back into the market, 100 days work come back into the market. Parallelly, you do a long-term process and the private sector is waiting. Not a single businessman in your show or any other television show today said they're going to invest. They haven't invested last year. Quietly,
no, I think that's an important point, Dr. Mitra. And
no, let me add, Vishnu, they took the tax cut given last year that went into their profits.
Sure.
So the middle of the pandemic, highest profit in 4 years was made in India because it was simply transferred into the books.
Yeah.
And therefore it became profit. Now that's not what you're looking for. You're looking for stimulation, macroeconomic stimulation, followed by, in the next step, followed by animal spirit, which only comes when there's excess demand. So all the business people on your shows are saying there is no excess demand.
All right.
What is the point of this big talk about this
Dr.
and
Mitra,
that?
let me get Amitabh Kant in on this. 2 points. Firstly, 100 days of work, the Manrega scheme, the point that's been mentioned is that, or which Dr. Mitra alluded to, is that A, that amount has actually gone down. B, even if you look at over the last few years of it having gone up, the problem which has arisen is that inflation has kicked in, and therefore the actual gain to people who need the amount allotted by Manrega, it's become less significant. Number one, that still is an important scheme, has enough been done to actually sustain it. And number two, the larger issue, which he says that has this government balanced its futuristic vision of what India needs to be with this reality where people are still hungry?
So let me respond to this, Vishnu. I have the greatest regard for Mr. Mitra, but I would beg to greatly differ from him. He's advocating similar philosophy as many advanced countries had done during the COVID period, created a lot of liquidity, and that has led to inflation, and that has impacted the common citizens across the world. You've seen the tightening of the dollar in United States, the sucking out of the liquidity that had happened. It has led to huge amount of inflation, and that has impacted global economy in the long run. So never make the mistake again of what has been done in the past. It's very, very important to put liquidity into the hands of people through tax breaks, which has been done. And throughout this COVID period, we supported over 800 million people by putting resources directly into their bank account or providing food to them. Nowhere in the world was this done.
Okay.
Right. And secondly, my belief is my belief is that the real great instrument for driving jobs, etc., is through actual capital investments. The capital investment creates the best quality jobs. It's not Manrega, it's capital investment. But that will have a multiplier impact on your economy. You are not thinking of today or tomorrow. You are thinking of a 3-decade period, a long-term vision of taking India to be a developed economy by 2047. You can't do this by Manrega. You need to do this through top-class quality investment.
On the issue of capital expenditure.
But also, let me say...
Yeah. Sorry, I'm just interrupting because on the issue of capital expenditure, let me also what the government had budgeted last year, that target has not been entirely met also, and yet it's gone up by 33% this year. So I think the question is that will we be able to utilize this money?
No, I'm absolutely sure that the government will utilize it. This requires a lot of hard work. This requires a lot of project structuring. This requires a lot of process of due diligence, land acquisitions, etc., putting all the approvals in place. But I'm quite sure that the government will ensure that this money is totally spent. But if you want to take India on the growth trajectory, then this is the way forward. It's not the Manrega route forward. I think we should absolutely be clear that we want to create good quality jobs for our citizens of India, not poor quality jobs. And that would require investment also in urbanization. That would also require investment in travel and tourism.
Dr. Mitra wants to respond. Yes.
Yeah, I think one more factor let me put in here. We talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. What is fascinating is that this year, our imports from China has hit 100 billion US dollars. Now, we have friction with China in the borders, but we have massive imports from China. What are we importing? We're importing electronic products, we're importing electrical products, all the fundamental chips in our economy. Now, question is, how do you become Atmanirbhar when you're China Nirbhar? Now, I didn't hear a word in the budget on how to manage this in the middle of the conflict with China, including Golwan in 21, we were doing that. By the way, Chinese economy is going to grow by 5%, which means that approximately, I made an estimate, it's an $18 trillion economy. Going by 5% would be almost 4 times that of our 6.5% growth. We have to be careful of that. But I did not hear a word in the budget. Only Atmanirbhar, big talk, all kinds of nice talk. But where is it that we can substantively show a path?
Mr. Kant, do you want to take on that point about the Atmanirbharta point that Dr. Mitra is making? And also, I mean, I'm just trying to take off on a larger point from there, that there is a concern that India's exports are also hit at the moment. The global economy is facing these headwinds, the depreciation of the rupee, high inflation. How do we deal with all those factors as we look to increase growth?
So let me first respond to Mr. Mitra on that point, because we are in a globalized economy. Our exports grew last year overall. In fact, they grew in a big way. There is an import intensity to exports. You are an integral part of global value chains. If you do not import, you can't export many products. You've seen our mobile manufacturing exports have grown enormously, but they have an import component. Different parts of a mobile are manufactured in different parts of the world. And same thing with capital goods, etc. To my mind, it's not the essential imports which are a worry. The issue is about non-essential imports which should be manufactured in India. And I think the government has taken a series of measures, both through tariff and through production-linked incentive schemes to drive manufacturing in India. Much of this result you will start seeing, as you are seeing in electronic and mobile manufacturing, you will start seeing in many other areas of growth in due course. The other question that you asked me was about headwinds across the world, etc. Yes, there are headwinds. But every crisis, to my mind, is an opportunity. What the budget has done is, despite several crises in the world, is to look at opportunities. That this is the time to do energy transition. This is a time to go for green hydrogen. This is a time to really to push digitization in the economy, which India has done. There's been enormous breakthroughs. We do about 11x fast digital payments compared to 11x more than what Europe and America does. We do 4x more than China. These are huge achievements. India should be proud about these achievements.
Dr. Mitra, are you being unnecessarily pessimistic? I take the point that you're saying about the need to look after those who are the most needy. But each of the points that Amitabh speaks about, whether it's digitization of the economy, the transition to a green economy, specific areas of excellence, for example, the IT services sector, right? Are these not things that you should be, praising?
No. I'll give you an example, practical example. TCS, Tata Consulting Service, #1 IT company in India, is employing right now in West Bengal 55,000 people in Kolkata. People don't know that. Number 2, I was very saddened when I heard the MSME question. What probably people do not know is small and medium enterprise lending is done at the state level banking committees, of which I chair. We are #1 in India in terms of MSME lending from the state level. I was also very unhappy that the budget talked about SHG, self-help groups of women, 98% women who pay back very well. When our government came to office, there were 1 lakh SHGs.
No, but Dr. Mitra, respectfully, you aren't answering my question. Dr. Mitra, respectfully, and I'm sure you've got lots of points you're making, but what Amitabh Kant speaks about, whether it is that green transition, whether it is digitization and all those other data points, on these aspects of the budget that we need to be praising irrespective of political or party affiliation.
Let me submit to you that budget has many components to it, and who can disagree that we need a hydrogen economy? Which person will disagree? Question is one of prioritization. It's a zero-sum game. You have 100 rupees. You have to allocate it in a balanced manner. All I'm saying is, you do Keynesian stimulation, macroeconomics 101, parallelly, you do massive amount of investment process, which will take time. You have a balance in that. What I find this budget is a rah-rah budget, which says we'll do this, which is represented very well by Mr. Kant and his conversation today. I am saying let's go to the grassroots level, balance the process. Okay. Yes, we need to do transition. By the way, you will need $4 trillion a year for the transition in the world, according to, conservatively speaking, per year. So transition is not something that will happen just
all right,
like
Dr. Kant, would you like to, last comment from you, respond to that. Do we have that 4 trillion to make?
No, Vishnu,
yes.
Vishnu, what grassroots transformation are we talking about? I was a small part of the aspirational district program where we transformed 112 districts where West Bengal did not even participate. And today, the budget has announced the 500 aspirational blocks, which is a hardcore grassroots transformational program. Now, this budget is not political. This budget is not populist. It's a transformational budget. It makes a paradigm shift in our growth strategy. It's a budget for building a new India of tomorrow.
All right.
I think I must say that, these are very nice conversations. I would suggest to Mr. Kant, go and get elected. Understand the grassroots level, because that gives you a real feel. And what that will do for you is perhaps this conversation will become a little different. My submission today is balance the process. Immediate. You need 5 crore people, 50 lakh people to be saved from the terrible situation.
Right. Okay, gentlemen, let's leave it over there. I don't think Amitabh has any intention of being elected. I think he works at a different level.
Vishnu,
I'm sure
Vishnu, you can play a role in the development of a country in different ways.
Right. No, I accept that point. I don't think you necessarily have to be elected. And I suspect that Dr. Mitra would accept that point as well. But thank you, gentlemen.
And I think it's an unfair comment to be made.
Okay. All right. Let's leave it over there, gentlemen. Thank you so much. And I think it's been a wonderful sort of conversation over there, looking at various aspects of models of development. Joining us now, Nilkant Mishra and Nilesh Shah. Thank you both very much for being with us. Mr. Nilkant Mishra, let's look at one of the big aspects of this, the big capex jump. Do you believe that A, it's the right thing to be done at this stage of our economy? B, is it going to generate the jobs that we so desperately need?
No, absolutely. So if you think about the macroeconomic context, the debt to GDP, because of all the interventions during COVID, the slowdown in GDP has been very elevated. It needs to be brought down. But if you bring it down, if you do very aggressive fiscal consolidation, it will slow the economy down and can potentially put you into a debt spiral. So you need to keep spending. What is remarkable about this budget is that all the savings from the food subsidy, from the fertilizer subsidy, and I was listening to the previous debate on Narega. Yeah. Narega is a demand-driven scheme. I think it is a mistake to think that there is low allocation. I think the assumption is there will be less demand for Narega. So allocating that extra resource into capex is, I think, the right thing to do to keep aggregate demand supported. So when we talk about Keynesian stimulus, it's not just about throwing money. It is about creating aggregate demand. I think that the capex numbers will support not just near-term demand by the fact that they will need construction and a lot of spend on the ground, but they also create scope for future growth. They bring down logistics costs. They bring down energy costs, improve energy self-sufficiency. And those, I think, are far more important. So if you build a road, remote parts of India become accessible. There are a lot of job creation that can happen there, manufacturing there for global demand. So no, I do think that this is an excellent use of resources, which are actually quite limited given how elevated our debt to GDP is.
Nilesh Shah, one of the big aspects of this entire budget was the process of digitalization. Linking DigiLocker, which is now going to be much more a part of our lives, with PAN and Aadhaar, new apps, really expanding on apps for 5G, taking that digital backbone as the basis of future economic growth. How is a lot of what we are talking about in the years ahead, say 5, 6, 7 years from now, going to be very much the basis of economic growth in our country?
So one, we all know that technology is future. Yesterday, what was an engineering product, a motor car, in tomorrow's world is going to be a digital product with a lot of software installed into it. Now, DigiLocker and digitization are going to help us in few ways. One, it will improve our productivity. I'm sure, Vishnu, you would have also gone to bank for your KYC. You would have gone to multiple KYC for dealing in shares, brokers, demat account, and so on and so forth. We can all reduce that wastage of time if there is digitization in showing our documents. Similarly, today, a small businessman spends a lot of time in filing documents. They file same documents to multiple government agencies, and we wonder why can't government agencies share the document among themselves? There is a proposal in the budget.
Hold that thought, Mr. Shah. Just hold that thought. We've got Ashwini Vaishnav, the IT and Railway Minister, with us. Thanks, Mr. Vaishnav, very much for being with us today. You know, we were talking about digitalization. I think you're the best person to actually talk about that. The cynics would say that the more you try and link, for example, DigiLocker with PAN and Aadhaar, it is a way in which you try and expand your tax net. It's a lot more than that, right?
Absolutely, Vishnu, and as Mr. Shah was very rightly explaining, this helps, this really brings out a huge ease of living in people's lives. We have all faced the problems, and see, it's not just me saying. You go to any international forum, the world today recognizes India's digital stack as a very unique thing that Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji has developed over the last 8 years. It has made a significant transformative change in every citizen's life. The payment system, the health system, CoWIN, each of these stacks are today at population scale and solutions which many of the developed countries don't have that kind of solution. Real-time payment, real-time settlement, imagine at a scale that we are doing, it's not there in any other country, right?
Right.
That's what is actually driving this digitization scheme. Yes, it will bring lots and lots of people into formal economy, and that's a very desirable goal. That's good for the country, that's good for the society. And yes, it will bring a lot of ease in people's life.
I just wanted to ask you, it all sounds fantastic, and if you look at some of the details, for example, digital payments, which have shown a 76% increase in transactions in 2022. But then you've got the opposition, which is making a couple of points that this budget is futuristic in a sense, which is not which is a good thing, but has enough been done to deal with inequality, has enough been done to deal with hunger and unemployment. So if you look at the overall budget, have we missed out on a lot more in terms of social spends?
I'm really surprised if the opposition is saying this. During COVID, when the whole world was reeling under huge, tremendous uncertainties, it was Prime Minister Narendra Modi who ensured that 800 million people get right time, they get the food grains, they get all the facilities, they get free vaccination, and people who would have otherwise gone into abysmal poverty are today in good condition. It's Prime Minister Narendra Modi who got Jan Dhan accounts for 40 crore people. It's Prime Minister Narendra Modi who got the Ujjwala scheme where the village households got gas connection. Isn't that inclusive growth? If that is not inclusive growth, then what else would be inclusive growth?
Yeah.
It is Prime Minister Narendra Modi who's giving Har Ghar Nal Se Jal to crores and crores of families. Imagine the kind of inclusiveness that a tap, I was born in a village, I can understand what is the need for water. Imagine the power of getting a tap water connection in your household, in a village. It's phenomenal. Imagine the power of Ayushman Bharat, which prevents people from getting back into poverty if a disease happens in the family. If this is not inclusive growth, then what else is? See, this opposition with its great economists and great people, they brought India to a situation because of their policy paralysis that India became one of the fragile 5 economies when UPA was in power.
Right.
It is Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji who has, over the last 8 years, brought that fragile 5 category to India is a bright spot. India is the growth engine for the global economy. That kind of situation, despite the global headwinds. Yeah. That's what, Vishnu, the reality is.
Mr. Vaishnav, there are global concerns, and this is another point that's been mentioned, that we don't know when the war in Ukraine is going to end. You know, that's just what there are a couple of global economies, big ones, heading into a recession. And these are factors which can actually impact us going forward. Are we completely insulated from those threats, those dangers?
Nobody is ever insulated completely from any global situation. That's a reality. What can we do different so that the global reality doesn't hit us that bad? That's what, if you see, Honorable Prime Ministers clearly thought through initiative of increasing capital investment since 2021 budget from 3.5, he brought it to 5.5 trillion rupees, 5.5 trillion rupees to 7.5 trillion rupees, 7.5 to 10 trillion rupees. Look at the math of this. 10 trillion rupees capital investment basically means in the economy it has an impact of 35 trillion rupees, 35 lakh crore rupees, right?
Right.
60% of this goes to the small and medium sector, right? Imagine 18 trillion rupees going into the small and medium sector, MSME sector. Each 1 crore investment creates about 4 employment in the country. So this 10 trillion rupee investment is going to create roughly, if you compute, more than 1 crore and 20 lakh employment in the country if you look at the multiplier and all of the factors together. This is something which is very important, and this approach is what has saved India from facing the similar situations which the Western economies are today facing.
Sure.
And with today's budget, India will outperform all major economies by a large margin.
Okay. I just wanted to get, I'm also joined at this stage by Shashi Tharoor. And, Mr. Tharoor, the point that's been mentioned, for example, by Rahul Gandhi, the point that's been mentioned is that, look, there is a problem as far as this budget is concerned, that not enough has been done as far as employment is concerned, not enough has been done in terms of equality is concerned. But then there's the parallel, the opposite vision, I should say, which Ashwini Vaishnav, for example, was trying to talk about, saying that, look, these are the various schemes which we have had. We have had tap water provided to so many homes. There have been so many toilets which have been provided. We have this massive capex program, and therefore that will result in employment. Look at the entire digitization strategy going forward. Look at the future of that. That brings so many more people into the economy. So when the Congress party criticizes this budget, are you just doing it for a political standpoint? I mean, what are you basing it on?
Vishnu, the fact is some of these things have been happening for the last couple of years. Capex has gone up every year for the last 3 years. Digitization has been in progress since before the COVID pandemic, since demonetization it's been talked about. And yet, unfortunately, it's made no dent in our unemployment figures. We have record levels of unemployment. And what is more alarming for anyone, I'm sure Ashwini Vaishnav would agree with me, is the extraordinary level of youth unemployment. Those between 15 to 29 years of age are now at 16% unemployment in our country amongst those looking for work. And in my state of Kerala, it's 40%. And really does worry me when young people don't find work, because they can also constitute a bigger sort of danger to society if we can't absorb their productive energies. On top of that, we've got exactly this, the very things the government is talking about with pride are potential problems. CapEx, which has been pointed out by Mr. Chidambaram in his press conference today, that the government didn't spend 22,000 crores of their CapEx money last year. Can they now add another 2.5 lakh crores and spend it? It remains to be seen. The government has a record in the last 8 years of announcing targets it fails to fulfill. And we're going to have to see if they can actually, not just draw a goal, but kick the ball into it. And that remains to be seen as well. The other concern that many of us have, you didn't ask it specifically, but it's worth mentioning, is where the priorities are. I'm glad that Ashwini Vaishnav's railways have got the money they've got. I'm glad that we've seen significant increases in infrastructure spending. But what's been cut? You've seen a massive cut in women and child development. You've seen a cut in integrated child development. You're seeing a cut in the Ministry of Minority Affairs. You're seeing a cut in the Ministry of Labour Affairs. And most shocking of all, you're seeing a record low figure for Manrega, which has been slashed to 60,000 crores. Now, Manrega is a demand-driven project. The demand has gone up 21% since before the pandemic. And last year, the Finance Minister actually came back to Parliament to ask for supplementary demands because the much higher sum that they had raised in last year's budget did not prove enough to meet the demand.
Right.
Now, when they've actually had to raise the money that they allotted last year, how on earth can they lower the money?
Let me just put that across.
Lots
of points there, Shashi. Let me put that across to Mr. Vaishnav. Number one, CapEx has gone up, but then will you be able to spend all the money which you have allotted? Number two, on the issue of priorities, Shashi Tharoor speaks about unemployment, specifically youth unemployment, as it exists now.
If you look at the last 3 years, CapEx targets have been achieved, significantly achieved, and very good quality work is there. This quality work is today increasing India's productivity, improving India's logistics, improving India's, it's providing that much needed boost to manufacturing because of these improvements. I'm very confident that the targets which have been put in the budget, those targets have been met in the past. This year they will be, this year also they will be met. Regarding employment, I would like to very clearly point out this entire strategy over the last 3 years has brought so much more employment into the system compared to many other economies. If you look at the Provident Fund data, the number of new joinees minus the people who are leaving Provident Fund plus people who are rejoining. So the net of this, the net new employment generated is of the order of 1.5 million every month, 15 lakh every month. Yes, because of COVID, there is a slack which has to be picked up, but rapid progress after COVID has really helped us, the entire society, in generating more employment. And this strategy which is there, best of the economists, if you ask them, they all say, yes, this is the right strategy. The strategy which was propagated by some economists connected to the Congress party, especially Mr. Raghuram Rajan, that was a strategy which has failed in other countries. It has created havoc in terms of very high inflation levels of 8% in US, a country where even 2% inflation was considered very high.
Right.
So the whole of Europe is reeling under 7 to 10% inflation rates. That's the policy which many of the economists who are friends of Mr. Tharoor were advocating, whereas our Prime Minister took a very conscious choice, very focused consumption, very focused investment, and that strategy is helping us come out of the COVID pandemic in a very significantly stronger way.
All right, Mr. Vaishnav, I think you need to leave at this stage. But Shashi, the point even in the economic survey was recovery complete. I mean, that's how they titled it. So they moved beyond the pandemic. They say that they now need real growth, and this is how they see it needs to be done.
No, look, they're entitled to their strategy, but a couple of things have to be said on what he said. First of all, even on CapEx, as the state governments are pointing out, a lot of the CapEx is basically conversion of what used to be grants to the states into loans, into interest-free loans, sure enough. But they're basically, that's what's driving, as the Tamil Nadu Finance Minister has pointed out, you've converted grants to loans, revenue spending to capital investment, and that's how you're able to show a dramatic increase in capex. It's playing with numbers to a great extent. And what is more, as I said, GDP growth in and of itself doesn't actually guarantee an increase in employment figures. So we've seen that there was a time in the past where 1% of GDP growth will generate a couple of lakhs of jobs. That's no longer true. We're seeing a lot of jobless growth. And even if inflation, according to Ashwini, is been relatively curbed, and we're all relatively happy about that, the fact is it has not been curbed in a very price-sensitive nation like ours, where the Aam Aadmi finds himself unable to afford his normal diet and his normal expenditure patterns because of the extent to which these have gone up in the marketplace. So we really cannot afford to celebrate all of this. I think the big picture numbers, the broad strategy are understood. I still have quarrels about some of the things. Agriculture has gone down.
So your problem is essentially the focus and the priorities, right? Because if you look at the 10 key budget takeaways and the numbers that they've backed them with, a lot of it is pretty impressive. Growth in gross tax revenue, 10.44% projected. GST target for 2023-2024 up 11.95% to 9.6 lakh crores. The fiscal deficit, they're projecting at 5. I could go on and on, 5.9%. Capex.
Vishnu, how about interest rates? We are paying 20 rupees out of every 100 gained in tax. We're paying just servicing our debts in terms of interest.
Right.
And interest rates are not only high, but they're going higher in the Western world as they grapple with the recession. So it's not going to be that easy to actually maintain some of those numbers when it comes to fiscal deficit projections, because our interest burden is actually going to be rising and not falling this year.
In fact, even if you look at subsidies, and this is something which the Congress party has spoken about, food subsidies, for example, the subsidy for financial year 2024, 1.97 lakh crores. It's actually gone up, according to them. So when you say that you aren't focusing on the poor or social sector spending, this is one statistic which they say is, it seems to suggest that they are working in the right direction.
No, I think we're seeing some money going into the PMKAY, which is the old National Food Security allocation, yes. But everything else, unfortunately, is down. Social welfare and social security spending have actually been cut across the board. Even PM Kisan, the Prime Minister's favorite scheme, has gone down from 68,000 to 60,000 crores. Agriculture is down from 83,500 to 76,000 crores. So there are cuts everywhere in order to finance this big mega capital spending budget. I hope the strategy works, because as an Indian, I want my country to succeed. I'd like us to see prosperity follow. But I do worry at the moment that the people who are the most vulnerable are the ones the government seems to have ignored in their announcements today.
All right, Shashi Tharoor, thanks very much for joining us and sharing your concerns at this budget. Also recognizing a couple of those numbers and statistics and what they're aimed at doing. But thanks very much for sharing your concerns as well. We're going to take a look at one of the aspects of the budget which concerns all of us. Let's take a look at, for example, the tax slabs, the new tax regime, which has been backed completely. Let's go across to my colleague Priyanshi for more on that.
Well, Vishnu, there have been several announcements for the common people, for the taxpayers, in terms of the taxes that they pay for their income. Now, the tax slab has been increased. The tax exemption limit has been increased from 5 lakh earlier to 7 lakh now. So earlier, under the new tax regime, people below the income of 5 lakh rupees did not have to pay any income tax. But now that limit has been increased to 7 lakh rupees. So people below the income of 7 lakh rupees do not have to pay any income tax. This was being anticipated and expected by the taxpayers for the last few years, as there had been no increase, no change in tax rates for the last 4 years ever since the year 2018. Now, how does this really impact you? Along with the increase in the exemption limit, there has also been change in the tax slabs under the new tax regime. Earlier, there were 7 tax slabs under the new tax regime. Now they've been reduced to 5 tax slabs. Let's just explain to you with examples how this really changes the taxation for for you and how this could even save you some money under the new tax regime. If your income is 7 lakh rupees, of course, you don't have to pay any income tax as the exemption limit has been increased. If your income is 10 lakh rupees, under the new tax regime earlier, before the budget, you had to pay an income tax rate that was 23,400 rupees higher than what you'll be needed to pay now. Now you'll pay 54,600 rupees. So you save 23,400 rupees. Now, if your income is 50 lakh rupees, then you pay an income tax of 12.32 lakh rupees, which is a saving of 54,600 rupees from your previous, from the previous tax regime. If you have an income of 6 crore rupees, then you save 20.87 lakh crore rupees. So this is how this works. But why is the saving really coming up? First, let's just explain to you how the taxation really works. If you have an income of 9 lakh rupees, then your first 3 lakh rupees get taxed at 5% according to the new tax regime that has been proposed by the Finance Minister today. So first 3 lakhs get taxed at 5%, which is of course 15%. Your next 3 lakhs, which is 3 to 6 lakh rupees, that bracket gets taxed at 10% according to the new tax regime. So that's 30,000 rupees. So 15,000 plus 30,000 rupees, that's how you get an income tax of 45,000 rupees on an income of 9 lakh rupees. So if for 0 to 3 lakh rupees, you don't pay any tax. For 3 to 6 lakh rupees, you pay a tax of 15,000 at 5%. For 6 to 9 lakh rupees, you pay a tax of 30,000 at 10%. So your overall tax is 45,000 according to the new tax regime proposed by the Finance Minister. But the existing new tax regime would have made the total at 60,000 rupees. So you're actually saving 15,000 rupees under the new proposed tax regime that has been proposed in the budget today. So as you can see, 9 lakh rupees had 3 slabs, 3 lakhs each, 0 to 3 lakhs, no tax. 3 to 6 lakhs, 15,000, and 3 to 6 lakh, 10% tax at 30,000 according to the new tax regime. So that's why you say 15,000 according to the new tax regime, and this has been done to promote the new tax regime, as there were few takers for this ever since it was announced in the year 2020. So that has come as a relief for the taxpayers in the budget this morning.
Well, there was a big focus, as you can imagine, on where the markets were. Sakshi's been tracking the markets when the budget was being announced by the Finance Minister. It went up 200 up, 300 up. It went up to more than 1,000 up. And then it really tanked. So run us through the day at the markets.
That's right, Vishnu. It really was a volatile day of trade for the markets today. And of course, we saw, like you said, the Sensex swinging by from those 1,000 points higher, over 1,000 points higher, to, of course, closing marginally in the green and red. So it really was a volatile day of trade for the benchmark indices, closing mixed. While the Nifty ended the day marginally in the red, we saw the Sensex ending marginally in the green. So, of course, sectorally also, it was a mixed picture, with PSU banks and metals being the worst hit. In stock-specific action, though, we saw the fact that the Adani Enterprises and Adani Ports stocks dragged the Nifty lower. And remember, Adani Enterprises and Adani Ports are not part of the Sensex. Therefore, investors witnessed this rare instance of divergence in the Sensex and the Nifty. Apart from this, of course, market-linked debentures being taxed at a marginal rate also dampened sentiment, as experts believe wealth managers may now be hit hard. So really a volatile day of trade, and of course more to watch out on how markets react post the budget come tomorrow.
All right, Sakshi, thanks very much. Well, one of the ministers we did speak to earlier on, primarily about what the budget has to say on the IT sector, is Rajiv Chandrasekhar. Here are a few excerpts of that interview. You know, we've spoken when we met last time so much about digitalization, and I think we see so much of that effort continue in the budget. For example, the entire effort at enhancing DigiLocker, extending it to or mating PAN, DigiLocker, Aadhaar. What exactly is the goal in terms of ease of business, in terms of what the government seeks to do? Is it just to draw in potentially more people into the tax net, or is it basically about ease for millions of people across the country?
No, Vishnu, it's not. There is an absolutely clear objective. We want to make it easy. As you know that millions and crores of Indians have the digital ID, the Aadhaar ID, and we have an Aadhaar identity authentication platform that is working very well to ensure that the identity of the beneficiary is the real beneficiary. So that has worked very well. We have then subsequently, as you know, built the India stack with multiple layers and multiple different applications, which include UPI, DigiLocker, CoWIN, etc., etc. And the India stack is something that is now expanding and growing. And as you heard in the budget, artificial intelligence also will be part of the functionality and the capability within the India stack. Now, the idea here is that just like we have multiple identities for citizens and corporates constantly complain about the need for having different identities. You have PAN for some sort of services and some sort of public registration, and then there are other identities that they have to use. So we have now said, look, we will just standardize that the identity of the corporate will be linked to his or her PAN, as the case may be, and that will be just a simple way for corporates to identify themselves as they navigate through an increasingly digitalizing government ecosystem and the government stack.
Okay. The scope of services in DigiLocker will be expanded. How?
Look, I think the DigiLocker is becoming increasingly the go-to
Absolutely. Indispensable.
Cloud. Yeah, personal cloud. And as the number of public services and the number of digital public infrastructure and digital public services expand, and they're only going to expand, as the Prime Minister and the budget signals, that the digitalization of government is only going to accelerate, and more services, more and more what the citizen wants, and a framework of trust and governance that the budget clearly outlines is going to be achieved by more and more of these services, ranging from e-courts to the other extreme. So the DigiLocker is really the personal cloud, if you want to call it that, for every Indian citizen, where he and she can store data, documents, and use the DigiLocker in turn for any kind of authentication, any kind of document sharing, any kind of verification between services or between government departments or indeed the private sector as well.
Another interesting steps is e-courts, and the Finance Minister has put an outlay of 7,000 crores, phase 3 of e-courts. How would this make legal dealings much easier? What is the ultimate goal of e-courts?
Look, I think the broad objective is really that the world's oldest democracy and the world's greatest democracy deserves the world's greatest digital justice system. And the many other arguments that are out there to expedite pendency. There are large numbers of cases that are held up. And so it is clear during COVID that the digital technologies, using of digital technologies in the justice system has helped people considerably address the issue of pendency. So the framework or the architecture of the e-courts has been finalized. It is something that is being driven by the Supreme Court committee. The government and the NIC and the MeitY have worked closely with the Ministry of Law and Justice to create a framework where almost every stakeholder who is a stakeholder of the justice system can navigate the justice system in the future using this new revamped next-gen e-courts that was alluded to in the budget.
All right, well, it's certainly been a long day. We've tried to bring you every aspect of the budget. We've brought you the top industrialists we've brought you the Confederation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry, CII as well. We've got you people from across the country, their reactions to the budget. We've tried to analyze it. There's a lot more that we'll continue to do. But for the moment, from all of us here, good night.